Welcome, everyone, to today's program hosted by ISM New Jersey. We would like to say a big hello to all of our ISM members that are out there today, our chapter partners, and our guests to today's show. We welcome your comments and your questions, so please make sure to put them in the chat function, and Stephen will get to them as soon as he's able to. Today's topic is vendor scorecards, managing vendor performance. And this has been a very popular program for today. A lot of attendees, so please be sure to put your comments and questions in the chat. We would love to hear from you. At this time, I'm pleased to welcome back Stephen Nichols, who is the founder of Banyan Business Outcomes. At this time, I'm going to turn the program over to Stephen.
Thanks, Kathy. Really appreciate it. I was thinking this might be my 8th or 9th presentation. I've done a bunch of these for ISM, so hopefully I'm a familiar face at this point for a few people. But welcome back, or it's good to meet you. Either way, how it comes out. So as Kathy mentioned, I'm the founder of Banyan Business Outcomes. It's a company I put together a couple of years ago. I'm focused on helping companies get great value out of their spend with their vendors. Specifically, technology vendors is where I seem to shine. So I come in and I call it like chiropractic work for vendors. So going in and fixing things. There is an awful echo. Are you getting that too, Kathy?
No echo.
Okay. Anybody else, or is that just Arlene? Sorry, Arlene. Well, let me know, and we might try to get creative about how to do it. Yeah, sorry. Well, in any case, so I founded the company, put it together, and that's some of the work that I do. I presented recently on contract lifecycle management, and that's another kind of area of strength that I have, because it's obviously related to getting good value out of vendor relationships. And in fact, Kathy and I have been talking about a survey that I'm putting together and a white paper that I'm going to be writing on CLMS and which systems are well accepted, which systems people prefer using and enjoy using. So I think that link went out. Please do click on that and fill out a quick little survey and let me know what you think about your CLMS, and I'll kind of aggregate all those results together and come up with some ideas for you too. But today we're not talking about CLMS. Today we are talking about getting great value out of vendor relationships. And one of the key tools in making that happen is a vendor scorecard. So the objective here is to talk about how vendor scorecards can be a vendor management tool to get the full value of the agreement and improve the outcomes. And we're going to be going through how scorecards can be a tool for management. We'll go through how you design a scorecard and what kinds of information you put into it. We'll talk about KPIs and SLAs and other metrics that you would use to record the performance. And then we'll get into systems. And I've been using ChatGPT for nearly everything, especially over the past few months. So I had a bunch of ideas for how to use ChatGPT on vendor scorecards, and I thought I would maybe do kind of a live demo. So stick around for that, and I can show you how you can take a contract and run it through ChatGPT and automatically generate some really useful insights from that. Okay, so the first thing is just to set the context here. What is the vendor value gap? Like, what are we struggling with as we manage our vendors and work with them? So first of all, there are obviously some vendor issues that can pop up. So some vendors are just bad. Some vendors deliver very poorly because of whatever reason is happening internally, whatever skill set they're missing, who knows, but that's on their side of the fence and we're not really aware of that. But it can impact the value that we get out of the relationship. Vendors also can get distracted with large customers, distracted with rapid growth or other issues in the business, other product lines to get introduced. So their focus can be bad. And of course, vendors are always guilty of overselling. So then actually vendor scorecards is a way of tracking against all three of those things. On the business side, or on our side of the fence, as we contract with these vendors, we may have a gap in value because we have poor visibility into what the vendor is actually doing. And that limits our ability to hold them accountable through formal tracking to make sure they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing and what we're paying for, right? And then a very common breakage point is that onboarding or transition phase when you worked really hard and signed a great contract, and then the new teams come on, the delivery teams come on, and everything falls apart. And it's not at all what was envisioned originally, and that can be something that is in part due to the way it's handed off from the procurement team into the operations team within your business. And then there are shared issues, which are things like misalignment, turnover. Obviously, when people leave from either side of the equation, you can end up having a problem. And then there's this thing called perverse incentives. That's when you're accidentally measuring the wrong thing or otherwise incentivizing someone to do something that is not in your best interest. And there's some really interesting research on that out in the world, and I link it up on I post it on my LinkedIn regularly. But we'll talk a little bit about perverse incentives during this conversation here. So in theory, though, when you work with a contract or work with a vendor, rather, the contract is the documentation of the value you're getting. And if the vendor would just live up to the terms of the contract, then none of this vendor value governance would be really necessary, is it? But the problem with contracts is that they're a lot like ice sculptures. They're beautifully crafted, momentarily celebrated, and then promptly forgotten. So I have been involved in countless negotiations throughout my career where I'm working out terms and conditions, and I'm arguing with CFOs and well, we can live up to this SLA, we can't live up to this SLA, and hammering out all the terms that happen. And then as soon as you finish it and you put it in place and then come back and look at it 6 months later, none of the operational teams are actually looking at any of these things. Because they end up often measuring the relationship or managing the relationship rather in this kind of anecdotal, informal, personal, and political way, right? If you say, well, let's look at the contract and see what's included in this, then that's kind of seen as maybe something like nerdy or overly meticulous, or I don't know, like there's all kinds of terms that get thrown around. It's good bedtime reading, stuff like that. But of course, the contract documents all of the expectations that both the vendor and the buyer had when they originally started this. So there has to be a way of making this much more actionable and bringing it out of that impenetrable prose that the lawyers always insist on using. And that's really what a vendor scorecard is going to do. It's going to make the contract terms and make the intention behind the engagement measurable. So you can actually see this and you can actually track the vendor's performance and the relationship's performance against those expectations and needs. So a vendor scorecard is going to help, first of all, with communication. It allows me to communicate internally with my teams up and down the chain as in terms of how this vendor is performing against it. I have a couple of examples I've worked with recently of situations where I'm working with a specific vendor and some people in the organization love the vendor and are unaware that other people in the organization hate the vendor. And that can be because of the seniority level. It can be because of varying degrees of experience, but mostly it's about that visibility and communication within the company so that everyone can understand what's actually going on with the relationship. And then, of course, it's about communication externally. The vendors who are held accountable and who have to see their performance on a scorecard on a regular basis are going to perform better because they're aware of how they're performing. And while vendors probably should be tracking this pretty closely, many aren't, because many are focused on finding the next deal, the next opportunity, growing their businesses, and they're not necessarily focused as they should be on delivering against SLAs and KPIs. Vendor scorecards also contextualize all of those things. SLAs and KPIs are great, but they're kind of just metrics, and they can be seen as this I don't know, like useless statistic, right? And you really have to contextualize the SLAs and KPIs through the scorecard to show how that connects with the business value that was intended with the engagement, and to show how to make sure that you're tying the performance to the SLA fulfillment, to the actual business value that you intended and that you're paying for with the relationship. And then finally, vendor scorecards can help with maturing the relationship, because as you're able to track the ups and downs of the relationship, ups and downs of performance against it, you can start to set goals. You can start to show that they're accomplishing those goals. And the idea, of course, with any kind of long-term agreement with a vendor, you're looking for better performance down the road on the 36th month of the agreement than you had during the first month of the agreement. The relationship should be maturing, and a scorecard is a way to ensure that that happens. Okay, so that's some context for what vendor scorecards are. And now we're going to dive into like how to actually start to frame up these scorecards. And let me back up a little bit. I'm going to be talking about primarily a scorecard that you might use for one of your strategic vendors, probably high spend, probably a ongoing relationship where you're working constantly with them through some kind of managed services relationship. But I think this applies also with other vendors too that might be smaller and more transactional for you too, as well. So as I'm saying how we design vendor scorecards, I'm thinking about that big relationship you have with multi-millions of dollars per year being spent. But of course, you can design a really tight, great scorecard that can be used for dozens of vendors that might be more transactional and it might be more of like a category of vendors, I guess, that you're managing. So I guess that's some context for it. Okay, so the first thing is there's a Peter Drucker quote that often is thrown around in business, and that is what gets measured gets managed. I'm sure everyone has heard that before, but it's the second part of the quote that I think is often forgotten, but maybe just as useful. Even when it's pointless to manage it, and even if it harms the organization to do so. And this obviously applies to vendor scorecards and SLAs, because in some cases, vendors will sign up to commitments within contracts that have nothing at all to do with the value to the business or nothing at all to do with the intended value of hiring the vendor in the first place. If you manage to all of those obligations, then you will end up spreading the vendor's resources extremely thin, where they're not actually working in your best interest. And this is probably the first example of a perverse incentive that I can bring up. An example of that is I was working for a technology managed services company, and we had a new contract manager or vendor relationship manager come on for one of our big clients. And she looked at the agreement and read it front to back and came back and said, well, the agreement says you owe us documentation on your processes. And we said, sure, yeah, we have that. And so we sent over what we had, and it wasn't what she was looking for. So this started a round of emails and meetings and conversations and apologies and a whole bunch of extra work got spun up because the documentation on our processes wasn't exactly what she was looking for. Meanwhile, we're trying to actually manage her environment, and I have to question whether the value is there. Like, why would we be focused on documentation when we should be focused on burning down a ticket backlog? I don't know. So if you measure the wrong things, you're going to manage the wrong things, and you're going to get the wrong value of the relationship, and you could create a perverse incentive. So that's something you definitely want to keep in mind as you design these scorecards. And in fact, when you design, you really have to think of what you're trying to design. So design with the end in mind, or begin with the end in mind. So what actions are is the scorecard going to drive? If you develop a scorecard and fill it out studiously once a quarter with the vendor and show the vendor, and the vendor nods and you nod, and then you go on about your day and nothing changes, then it wasn't very valuable, was it? It was kind of just a waste of time. So if you want to think, so as you design these scorecards with vendors, you really have to think about what you're trying to accomplish, or what is a likely outcome. Like if it's discovered that they're missing this SLA, discovered that there's some kind of gap here, then what are you going to do next, right? And if you think through that, then you're gonna have a better outcome for it too. So who's going to use it? When are they going to use it? Why are they going to use it? Is it about executives having good visibility into how your vendors are fulfilling agreements? Is it about operational teams being able to communicate with the vendor to show that we're not having the performance or the experience that we want? Is it about internal collaboration? Like, what's the point, right? What am I trying to prove is another one. In some cases, everyone anecdotally knows that a vendor fails or is wonderful, either way. And maybe that's the point of the scorecard, is to actually put some metrics and numbers and some objective statistics behind that perception so that you can justify it to everyone else when you talk about the vendor elsewhere. So you're really starting with a problem that is worth solving. So individual vendor performance gaps is probably the most obvious one. The vendor's not doing what he's supposed to be doing, so we're using the scorecard to show him he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing. Better visibility and control, better leverage over the vendor, or strategic sourcing, meaning directing spend where vendors succeed, or when vendors are doing really well, and directing spend away from vendors who are failing, right? So those are all things to kind of think through and whiteboard before you ever put pen to paper in actually designing this. So one of the points I mentioned earlier is you have to have the SLAs, KPIs, the individual contract terms that are built out and enumerated in the vendor scorecard, because they're going to be performing against those things. That's what they're obligated to perform against. But it's important to contextualize. Remember, I said contextualize what those things are. So here's an example of a scorecard that I created for our client quite some time ago, a couple of years ago, I guess. But what I had was all the corresponding contract terms listed out. This was for a managed services agreement I was working on. I have quarterly performances on a scale of 1 to 5, how well they did for each of those different contract terms. And this all came from a spreadsheet I'll show in a second, but it's all a big integrated spreadsheet with multiple tabs, that kind of stuff. And then a couple of important things here is there's that objective on the left-hand side. So I group the contract terms by the objective that I'm trying to accomplish with it, right? So if users are well supported, then I know my incident management is handled well, and I know my service request management is handled well. If the service is maintained, well, then the preventative maintenance has to be really good, and the monitoring has to be really good. Service is maturing means problem management, which is how you like identify trends within tickets and address those things. So that's got to be pretty good. Enhancement of services, et cetera. I don't have to read the whole thing. But this is a way of contextualizing the individual contract term. So when I take this in front of either someone internal on my side, the executive or whoever, or when I take it in front of the vendor, they're able to look at this and they can see not only what the contract term is, but also why is it important? Why does anyone care about things like preventative maintenance or governance or reporting or whatever it might be? This contextualizes it so it makes better value out of it. So, I mean, this is pretty good, I guess. The second, so this would be one of the tabs for each of the quarters built out. So you have the obligation, you have some detail from the contract, you have past quarter objectives, and that's pulling from the quarter before, performance notes, and then some scoring over there. And this would be a sheet that you'd want to walk through with the vendor on a regular basis, once a quarter or so, to give some feedback. Like this is how you guys did over the last quarter, and this is what we're tracking you, right? That's the point of this. The past quarter objectives and the performance notes, those are kind of interrelated to each other, because it's an opportunity to ask the vendor to start to set goals and mature delivery. So if they're saying, my last quarter, my objective in terms of preventive maintenance was to do 16 patches and yada, 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 whatever it was. Well, then you can bring this up in the next quarter's meeting and say, well, did you actually do what you said you were going to do? And then that is going to lead to performance scoring on some level, right? So it all kind of connects together as it comes together. And I don't know, I think this is okay. I think this would probably work really well for a less strategic vendor. I don't know that it gets to the actual value of the relationship. It doesn't get to what I really want out of it. Although, I mean, it does mention the objectives here with users being well supported and service maintained, et cetera, that kind of stuff. But I feel like there's something of a gap there, and it could be a little bit better. So I was thinking about, like, what does a successful management system look like? And there's a couple of things I pulled out of a book that I really like. Organizational context is obviously really important. So, why do we care about this? What's the context within the other goals or strategic objectives within the company already? Supplier specific, so make sure you're writing a separate scorecard based on every individual contract that you have, right? Goal alignment, it has to be a business-wide approach. Supplier involvement is appropriate. I think they're a good management tool, so I think that's probably appropriate. Although if you're preparing to, kick the vendor to the curb, then maybe that's not something that you want them to be involved with. I'm not sure, it kind of depends. Focused resources, so is it going to get vendors, get people working where they need to be working? Is it balanced and fair? Is it foster positive behavior? You really don't want to have one of these scorecards that comes back and says you're a 1 across the board. Because I mean, it's just so deflating. You're probably not going to get out of the relationship what you want out of that conversation, right? And then meaningful outputs too, right? Like, are we leading the direction that we want it to go? Okay, so like I'm not sure that the scorecard I just presented actually meets some of those criteria, right? I think it's maybe a little less balanced. I think it's a little more focused on the particulars of the agreement, too contract balanced. Contract focus, that kind of thing, and maybe more of a balanced scorecard approach fits better. So for companies, the balanced scorecard is, I think, universally known. I think probably everyone has had some experience with this in the past, but it's a way of looking at how a company performs across 4 different areas: financial performance, which is like revenue, OPEX, net profit, that kind of thing; customers' performance, are they happy with what they're getting? Learning and growing, are you, employee retention, are employees learning things, are they satisfied, are you maturing your processes? And then internal, which is focused around, downtime and inventory level, unit costs, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of consultants who works exclusively in balanced scorecard. I'm not quite one of those guys, but I think that balanced scorecard approach could be applied here to a vendor scorecard as well. And so I was thinking about, like, well, what would that look like? So a balanced scorecard for a vendor relationship would have delivery items, so SLAs, KPIs, performance, maturation, how well are they doing, that kind of stuff. It's going to have experience kinds of things. So is your team happy working with these people, right? So net promoter scores on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely would you be to recommend this vendor to a friend or family member, right? It's pretty black and white. If it's a low number, that's probably not a great experience. Signal to noise is something I have in there too. A lot of vendors deliver what they're supposed to be delivering, but my God, it requires a ton of meetings. You're always working with this vendor to do alignment, and every invoice is wrong, or it's just such a hassle, right? So signal to noise, how much signal are we actually getting for all of the noise and all the extra work we have to do? Carrying costs might be another way to say that. Innovation as well. So are they being independent in solution? Are they bringing ideas to us? And if we ask them a question, are they being responsive and coming back to us? And then finally, risk. Obviously, cybersecurity should be front and center for almost anyone working with third parties at this point. Operational risk, reputational risk, and there's a whole bunch of risks out there. So consider all of those things too. So I think this balanced scorecard approach would probably give you a better sense of how a vendor is delivering. But obviously your scorecard is going to be different from your neighbors or the guy down the street, because your company probably needs different things, that you define value in a different way. And I wanted to build this. This is an animation, apparently. Okay, so definition of value. This is a way of defining what you're actually looking to get out of your vendor relationships. If you work through the definition of value and you have this as one of the key slides that you use and you present to vendors, like, what do I want out of my vendor relationships? Then this can really create a lot of leverage, and it can help to elevate everyone's perspective so they understand what you're trying to do with them and how they can best perform to become strategic for you. So this is an example that I have personal experience with. It's adapted from something that a CIO of a big company once showed me, and I thought it was really, really great. So I thought I would present it here too. But we ask our vendors to act as team members, which means fostering an atmosphere of collaboration and open communication, make everyone around them better, including other vendors, right? Owning the solution, so act as if you own my stock. Be aggressive and impatient about solving problems. And I love that impatient word, especially with managed services partners, because if I have to keep asking you if you've solved this problem, I have to keep pointing out the problems that I'm seeing, that I'm not getting great value. I'm not getting like product leadership out of that, right? Continuously improve, of course, and then deliver with excellence, which means hit your SLAs, hit your expectations, focus on value, not technology, things like that, right? So whatever your definition of value, and this is some of the work that I do, is defining value, defining what people want out of their vendor relationships, and then having that as a way to contextualize vendor performance. So this is something that might come back into a vendor scorecard, because you're going to be scoring your vendors against these 3 things: act as a team member, own the solution, deliver with excellence. And that's a much more elevated way to talk to a vendor about a relationship, as opposed to getting into the nitty-gritties about SLAs and KPIs and contract terms and that kind of thing. So another example of that, in terms of measuring value, you might have an objective like tiers 2, 3 support is efficient and comprehensive, and those are some key results that support that. And you can kind of read through it as I talk, I guess, but those are objectives and key results. Let me pull that one in too. There's a great book called Measure What Matters. I think that's right. It's written by one of the guys who was one of the executives at Intel for years. It has the best pedigree of any business book you will ever read. It's like like Bill Gates wrote the foreword, like that kind of thing. It's everybody who's in a tech company uses something like it. And one of the big themes in the book was OKR. So you have an objective, which is an intangible way of measuring setting a goal, right? Like becoming #1 in customer service. I don't know how you measure that. And then a key result, which means if you achieve all the key results, then the objective had to have been met. So a little context, I guess, for that. Great book if you're interested in that kind of thing. I'd recommend picking it up, but also applicable to the vendor scorecard too. Okay, I threw a lot at you guys. That's kind of the point, I guess. But next thing here talks about some examples of key performance indicators that might be of use to you. And I'm pulling this again from that Jonathan O'Brien book that I always reference, and I think is really great. Some of these I, direct experience with, and some of them are a little bit out of my wheelhouse. But you might be looking at financial and cost performance, safety, quality of service, delivery performance, effectiveness measures, supplier performance, and relationship, of course, too. So I guess the point of this is there's a lot of different ways to measure a vendor's performance and measure a vendor relationship, I guess. Pick the ones that are going to be appropriate for the relationship that you have and that are going to drive toward the type of experience and business outcome you're looking for. I'll just pause for a second so you guys can see them through this. And then I think the recording is going to be up on YouTube if you want to come back and take a look at the slide, and we'll send the deck out too. But yeah, this might be helpful. Actually, I'm going to slowly take a drink of my soda. That's a lot of talking. Okay, so those are KPIs. So with all these different ways to measure a vendor and how they're performing, why is it so hard? And why is it that some systems, when they get deployed, end up failing ultimately? Well, there are a couple of things that can go wrong, right? The first one is you can be measuring the wrong things. It might be in the contract. It might be an expectation that you have. If it's not relevant to either party, then stop measuring it. Because it just distracts from the things that are important. Measuring too many things. Good scorecards measure against 4, 5, 6 different statistics. If you're doing dozens of them, then it ends up diluting the message and not getting where you want it to be. Data collection, that's a really critical one because you're trying to design a system that's going to be self-populating ideally, but something that doesn't require a whole big lift to get ready every quarter for the review. So if you're able to pull in data from other places, it's much better. So bad data inputs, that kind of thing. Difficulty securing data information, obviously important there too. But important things can be very hard to measure. It can be hard to be objective about something like innovation, like how many ideas did you give us? Like, that's not really a good metric for it, but you got to be kind of creative with some of this stuff. Lack of goal congruence. The goals really have to align between the SLAs of the vendor, the expectations for the vendors, or the definition of value, and then also the goals and like annual objectives for each of the people measuring the vendor and the department and the company. There has to be good alignment all the way through. And if anything's off, then you'll end up not paying quite the amount of attention that you need to each of those individual performance objectives. Results don't highlight things to act upon. That's the scenario where you see the results come back from the QBR and you're like, oh, it's great, but I got a day job and I don't know what I'm doing. Outputs don't tell the story, of course. Failure to act, suppliers dispute measures and data, and then measures used punitively driving defensive behavior, which I think all of us probably guilty of every once in a while. Yeah, you don't want to put the vendor on the defensive. I mean, it is about people, it is about relationship, and there is something to be said about leading vendors. That's another topic for another day. Okay, so why systems fail. Those are some ideas for what that looks like. Next section here is systems and automation. So once you have in mind all of the things that you want to track with the vendor scorecard and all the things that are important to the relationship, how do you actually keep all this organized so people can use it? Quick side note too, you'll see some of the images that I put up here, they have like funky numbers on them and they're a little strange. Well, they're all artificial intelligence generated, or many of them are. I'm kind of an AI enthusiast and thought it was kind of fun. And it's my presentation, so I'll do what I want. So I put that up. That's an AI generated by Dolly 2. I don't know, it's kind of cool. Let me know what you think. But, yeah. Okay, good. So KPIs are based on good data. So the question when you're actually when you're designing these vendor scorecards is, does the data already exist? Like are we able to just create a graph of data that's already there, like uptime or that kind of thing, that would measure exactly what we're actually trying to get out of this thing? So is it reliable and relevant? Can we sustainably create the data? Could the data connection break or collection break? Like if Sally goes on vacation, does it not happen? That kind of thing. Does the data actually indicate performance? And then how will the data be used? Who's going to use it? When and why will they use it? And what decisions will come from it? So if you spend some time thinking through all these, whatever that is, that's 12 different questions, then you might come up with some different requirements for the vendor scorecard than you had before. So you think about kind of the data that supports these requirements. There's probably a data warehouse you guys have. You probably have an ITSM, if it's a technology vendor. You have ERP, of course, and your accounting system might come back. Source to pay, etc. And then for data collection, you might also make special effort to do things like stakeholder surveys. So that's where you send out like a net promoter score survey once a quarter or a month or at the end of a project to see how people did. Third-party data, maybe the vendor stuff they can put in there too. Customer surveys, and then vendor supplied data. I guess third-party data would be something more objective from some other source I'm not thinking of. Yeah. So you think about how the data structure is going to support this KPI so you can automate the production as much as possible. Another thing to think about is what systems are already in place. These are some logos that I'm sure are pretty familiar to almost everybody. There are ERP systems, and there's contract lifecycle management systems, and then there's the vendor management systems, and then there's Microsoft Excel. And all of those have modules or whole suites, I guess, that address a specific problem. If you can reuse the technology that you already have, as opposed to creating yet another integration and some kind of connection that has to be maintained, you're probably going to be better off. For me, I think Excel is very effective, especially if you're trying to create like a moment in time or a turning point for a vendor relationship, because Excel collects the data really well, and it allows you to have a great conversation without having to overinvest in the technology layer that supports that. That's kind of how I work. Yeah, I wonder which of these are most familiar to the people on the call, or if you guys have experience with it. One to pull out too, iCertis is a contract lifecycle management system. They have systems that actually kind of automatically generate vendor scorecards based on the contracts that get fed into it. Super cool. Syrian Labs has something pretty similar to that too. And of course, ServiceNow, everyone has ServiceNow. Well, not everyone, many people. Okay, so those are some systems, but what I thought we would do is dive into the big elephant in the room, which is ChatGPT. I use ChatGPT constantly, like all day long. Like it's up on this screen right here all day long, and I'm always working on the thing. And I'm using it as a collaborative tool, right? I'm having conversations with it and having ideas come back and forth. As a consultant, which is largely what I do, it's probably made me maybe 3 times more effective, 3 times faster than I was before. I think back to some of the projects that I did even just a year ago, and I probably could bill a third of the hours than I billed before using ChatGPT. So I've had so much success with this, and I would highly recommend everyone use that. As long as your company doesn't get too bent out of shape if you do. But I thought what I would do is pull up ChatGPT and show you how you can dissect a contract and really quickly generate a vendor scorecard from various perspectives. And I don't know, maybe this would be kind of cool, I guess. So if you guys will kind of humor me, I'll pull that up and work through that. So, okay, so the content we're going to look at is this. There's this highly adaptive cybersecurity services, security operations center services statement of work. And that comes from a government website, and I'll start to share some things and throw them onto the screen. Hopefully that comes across. But this is coming off of the GSA website, and they kind of a template for how to. Here, let me close this. 1 second, sorry. We need that theme music. So this is the agreement coming back from it. Kathy, is that coming across? Can you guys see my screen still, or is that coming down?
Yep, no, we can see it.
Okay, awesome, great. So this is just an example of a contract that I pulled off of the GSA website. I mean, obviously your contract is going to be a little bit different. The kinds of techniques I'll show you are applicable both to contracts, it's applicable to RFPs, RFP responses, which is really helpful for the people who are involved in the procurement side of things. And vendor scorecards, vendor data, it's applicable everywhere. It's pretty great. So this is a statement of work here that I have, right? And it looks pretty familiar, right? There's some background, there's objectives, then there's the scope section. The scope section is quite lengthy. Some definition of various things they have to do, requirements, tasks. Here's the program management section for subtasks. And if I get down here, it's the SOC Operations Services. So SOC, if you're not familiar with that, is the Security Operations Center. So it's like outsourcing your cybersecurity department. That's kind of what that does, right? So if you look at the SOC system, there's several different subtasks that are related to this, right? They need monitoring and analysis support, digital media analysis, cyber intelligence, yada, 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 these 7. And then down here below it, we have paragraphs that describe each of these 7 different subtasks required for the Security Operations Center. There's a lot to say. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to copy this section right here. One second. And this is the part of the demo that I'm nervous is going to break, but we'll see how it goes. So I'll copy all of that and grab it. And then I'm going to take it into my ChatGPT window. And I'm going to say, describe the business value delivered by this service. And I'll paste it right in there and hit enter. And it's going to think for a second. And I got to click on this button and it builds it out. So insert your oohs and ahs here, but it goes through each of the 7 different points and says, well, these are the things you're going to get out of doing each of these 7 different things, and provides a quick little detailed summary, which is pretty great, right? We'll let it finish here. And then I'm going to start another conversation. I'm going to say, tell me the typical several reasons for why a company would hire a SOC provider. And it's going to give me some more information. So expertise, experience, cost efficiency, 24/7 monitoring, compliance requirements, advanced access tools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's pretty good. So then I might say, well, it's kind of going on and on and on. All right, so I'll say, how do these items align with the value provided by the agreement above? So the technique here is you ask a series of questions and let it kind of do some of the thinking and some of the research for you. ChatGPT is really effective at summarizing large amounts of information into quick little bullet points, so you don't have to actually, read and think through and digest every single thing that comes through. So you see I'm comparing 2 different things together. So you see how expertise and alignment is mentioned through this digital media analysis and cyber intelligence, cost efficiency lines up there, yada, 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 and it comes back. So that's pretty good. So what if I say, I like some SLAs and KPIs that align with the business value as described? It'll actually come back with some more ideas around that. Now, you probably would want to pull this out of the agreement. The agreement I'm using doesn't actually have this detail, so I have to kind of make it up. But you probably would be pulling out the actual SLAs and KPIs that came out of that. Action rate, yada, yada, yada. Okay, that's pretty good. That's pretty healthy, right? Just as an aside, because this is kind of cool, write an RFP for this service. And I'll just show how quick this is. And it writes the whole RFP. It comes back. Now the trick here is you dig into each of these individual sections and build them out and do it collaboratively. So if I say, so instead of just rewriting the introduction myself, what I'll do is I'll ask a series of questions to ChatGPT to get it to rewrite the section, and that seems to be the best approach for doing that kind of thing. But you can have that come together pretty quickly. And then, well, I'll just stop the generation. It'll go on for a while. Write a response to the RFP for Joe's IT security. And it'll do this as well. I think we're probably at a point where, well, within the next year or so, it'll be unlikely that you'll ever read again an RFP response or a proposal from a vendor that wasn't written through a ChatGPT or some kind of large language model service. And I think shortly after that, it'll be pretty rare for anyone to actually ever read RFPs coming back, because you can just have ChatGPT summarize whatever's in the RFP and then come back to it. So I mean, just some jaw-dropping capabilities here. Okay, but let's get back to vendor scorecards, because that's awfully cool. But maybe it's not quite what we had in mind. So what I want to do over here is come back to the agreement that I had. Here are my subtasks that I'm trying to measure against. And then I say group each subtask into the business value being created by that subtask. So come back, gives me all of those things. I mean, it's just kind of incredible, right? So then say something like this. You create a matrix using have delimited, how do you spell that? Delimited, something like that. Format, so I can paste into Excel. The first column should be the subtask. The second should be the business value. The third should be a metric that measures it. The fourth be left empty. I can manually insert data. And it just does it. It just creates the whole thing. In my experience, you probably have to do this maybe 5 or 6 times to get it to be where you need it to be. But that being said, like it saves an immense amount of work. And my own my business, what I'm doing as a consultant, easily twice, maybe 3 times faster than I was before. So if I copy and paste that into Excel, this is the part that breaks for me actually. But I'll take this, I'll put it into Excel. Okay, some of the formatting is a little weird, but it's pretty good. So business value is proactive threat detection, number of detected threats, compliance management, compliance score, risk management, risk reduction percentage, operational efficiency, operational uptime percentage, data management, data accuracy. Like these are probably all the right metrics that measure that business value. These are the subtasks over here. And then I think probably what we need before is like the objective level. So I can add objectives for, why are each of these things important to me? Why is proactive, why is all the monitoring analysis important? Why is digital media analysis important, et cetera, like that, and build it out. And then the last column was left empty, so I'll say 2024 Q1, 2024 Q2, etc. And that's the start of the vendor scorecard coming together. It's a lot to manage, though, isn't it? Like that would be a lot to track. That's too many metrics. Let's give that feedback. So recreate, but limit the number of tracked metrics to 10 by combining let's do that. Well, anyway, it goes back and forth and back and forth. That's probably gonna be the better outcome. Index, okay. Okay, let's see what that looks like over in Excel. That's pretty good. That's pretty tight, right? Yeah, that's pretty good. So it can also be used. ChatGPT can also be used to gauge performance or to track out how well the vendors living up to some of these statistics. If you're looking at crunching large numbers or large amounts of data points, then that can be really effective. An example of that would be if you send out a survey to 100 different users that use the service and it's a net promoter score, and there are a bunch of comment boxes to it. You can take all those comments and you can paste that into ChatGPT and say identify trends and summarize the feedback on this particular service, and it will do a really good job of crunching that together and coming back with something rather succinct. You can then say, give me a performance improvement plan focused on the feedback from these users during this time period, and it's perfectly capable of creating that as well. Really, the bounds here are pretty incredible. So that's something that I work with constantly. I'm actually doing development work in ChatGPT as well. It's kind of where my business is headed and to some extent. And I don't know, I think it's kind of cool. I thought I would show it off. So let me see. Let me get back to the presentation then. Hopefully that was helpful. So content analysis might be done through that. The last kind of summary slide for what we should think about when we deploy a scorecard is, first of all, begin with the end in mind. Get buy-in from all of your stakeholders so everyone agrees that these metrics and that this scorecard is going to be the single source of truth and the record that demonstrates their performance. Determine all the KPIs and make sure those KPIs are aligned with your requirements, your business objectives, and all the way up the chain. And then start small and iterate is going to be pretty important too. No one gets it right the first time around, so give it a couple of shots at it, and then automate as much as possible through automatic data gathering, and then mature both the scorecard and use it to mature the vendor's performance across the board. So those are vendor scorecards. That's vendor value governance, and some ChatGPT as a little bonus. And I think we have 12 minutes here left. If there's any questions at all, I'd love to answer them, and or you guys can ask about my guitar.
If anybody has any questions, just put it in the chat, or actually, you got something that came in. Thank you very much. Cool demo. See, told you they liked the demo.
Okay, great.
Yeah, but if you have any questions, please put it in the chat or the Q&A, and Stephen will definitely answer your questions. So, Stephen, do you have any future topics you'd like to bring to our audience?
Well, I have to think about that, I guess. I mean, the contract lifecycle management piece would be pretty useful. There's a lot of really interesting innovation that's happening in that area. I guess we just did that here a couple of months ago, but I think probably in another few months it will have changed a little bit. And then the ChatGPT and artificial intelligence, I mean, that's really going to be the game changer here. It's I was meeting with a group of CIOs earlier this week on Monday, and all of us were just kind of like looking at each other in shock, like this is going to be overwhelming for everybody. Like this is going to transform society. So I mean, maybe that might be something interesting to dig into too.
Yeah, definitely. What I've heard is the next 2 years, you're going to see big changes within AI.
Huge. Yeah,
Yeah,
just absolutely huge.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a few comments here. First one, Stephen, how do you confirm that your clients are okay with having their contracts analyzed in Chat GPT?
Yeah, so it's a good question because anything you put into the model gets fed into the model and becomes part of that, and you can end up with a compliance issue if you're not careful with it. A couple of, I guess the first best practice is make sure you're being transparent about what you're using. Everyone I talked about ChatGPT, so I try to be fair and open about that kind of thing. If there is information you want to put in a ChatGPT where that has like PII in it or some other kind of identifiable information that shouldn't be in there, then you go through and do a find and replace and eliminate the client's name or eliminate the vendor's name, so it just looks like a anonymous tokenized information, right? So instead of Stephen Nichols, it should say 6723CQB2, right? Or some random string of characters. And the ChatGPT it will understand that it's a name and will still give you the same kind of information out of it, but you're not actually feeding anything that's identifiable to the model. So that might be an effective way to get around that. But I mean, frankly, I think the concern, this is my personal view, I think the concern about what you're feeding in ChatGPT, I think it's a temporary concern in the same sense that, if you remember like 10 years ago, we were all really nervous when websites knew who we were when we logged into them already. And now we're a little less nervous about it because we got used to it. I think that probably some of the concern about that will die down, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I can be wrong.
Okay, another came in. They actually like your session and everything. They would like you to actually do a session just on Chat GPT, and I'm thinking probably more for the procurement function.
Yeah, you bet. Great. Um, like I said, use it constantly. I'd be happy to put together a webinar for ISM if that's what you guys want to do. I'm doing a coaching work for a couple of companies where I come in and kind of do the basic training for it and show them how they can use it. And that's an option as well if you guys are interested in that kind of thing. But yeah, who enjoys reading vendor RFPs, right? RFP responses. Like what you're actually able to do is, okay, let me go on a little tangent because it's cool. What you can do is take your RFP and ask ChatGPT to develop a scorecard or a scoring mechanism, scoring matrix for your RFP, and it does it. And you make that's the sound it makes. And then you make all the changes that you like to it. You adjust the numbers where you want it to be, and then you copy back into ChatGPT and say, score this RFP based on this matrix, and provide quotes and references to justify your scoring. And it's jaw-dropping how accurate it is in coming back and scoring these things. And now it's never going to be, well, and for now, it's not going to be the end all be all, right? Like a human being still needs to read it and confirm that it's correct. But if you wanted to cut the time in half where you're reading it, this is the way to do it. It's really pretty cool. Yeah.
Okay, another question came in. Do you know of any other AI sites besides Chat GPT that you can
Yeah.
share?
Apothic. So I'll give a couple examples. So Apothic is another company that does artificial intelligence. They call it Claude 2 is their model. It's much friendlier. It's much more conversational. I use Apothic in the morning when I'm making my coffee. I don't do it all the time, but sometimes where I'll just turn on Apothic and I'll just ramble about my day and what I'm thinking about, and then it'll provide feedback. It'll build out like schedules for me, and it's like having like a good friend that you ride the subway with into work, right? That's kind of how it feels, right? So Apothic's really cool. Claude 2, try that if you haven't tried it before. And then Microsoft Bing has had ChatGPT integrated into it. I know Bing had a bad reputation for a long time. What they're doing though with ChatGPT is game changing, where you can start to ask for a chat, use the chat button, and it will actually give you real examples, and you have a conversation with Bing. Really cool, really cool.
Wow, thank you. If anybody else has any other comments or questions, please, share with us. But at this point, I'd like to thank you, Stephen, for bringing another important topic to our ISM community and to all of our guests that joined us today. We're very grateful that you constantly come to us with new topics, and we really appreciate that. Helps us with our skill sets, definitely. And there was a question out there. Yes, there will be a recording that'll be sent along with your continuing education. And if I get Stephen's slides, I can actually send those along too if he permits those to be sent out to everybody.
Yeah, for sure. You bet. I'll send it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so at this time, I'm going to close out the program. I'm going to say thank you for joining us today, and hopefully we'll see you on our next program. Probably, I think, is going to be next week, actually. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you all.